Quick question!
Welcome to British Focus, where we cut through the noise and expose the truths that the mainstream media refuse to tell you. Today, we unravel the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer, a man who parades himself as the saviour of the NHS while his arguments crumble at the first sign of scrutiny. Starmer supporters want you to believe that he stands for the people, for the working class, for the integrity of our public services. But the reality? His rhetoric is nothing more than smoke and mirrors, a distraction from the inconvenient facts. Under his leadership, the NHS remains in crisis, with longer waiting lists, staff shortages, and record-breaking inefficiencies. Yet instead of offering real solutions, Starmer's response is panic, evasion, and empty slogans. Why does he refuse to engage in honest debate? Why does he immediately resort to fear-mongering when someone dares question the failing status quo? The truth is simple: he has no real plan, no vision, no alternative, just more bureaucracy and broken promises. Make sure to like and subscribe to British Focus so we can continue exposing the lies of the establishment. Now, let's dive into the video.
The Honourable Member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system.
If I can assure the Honourable Member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised. To ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
Order! I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is then shut it down forever. Quick question!
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including... What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
Keir Starmer, the man who twists and turns at the mere sight of the truth, the so-called leader who claims to stand for the people yet panics whenever real issues are brought to the table. What is he so afraid of? Why does he and his allies crumble into hysteria whenever an alternative to the status quo is proposed? It all began with John Slinger raising the stance of reform in the House of Commons. Reform suggested a discussion, yes, a discussion, about how to make the NHS more efficient, sustainable, and still free at the point of use. And what was Starmer's reaction? Not engagement, not debate, not even an attempt at countering with logic and facts. Instead, panic, dismissiveness, and cheap attacks. This is the Labour Party under Starmer, terrified of open discussion, unwilling to acknowledge their failures, and completely out of ideas. Let's talk about Nigel Farage's intervention. He pointed out that 25,000 people in Clacton, including a 99-year-old veteran who risked his life for this country, are losing their winter fuel allowance, struggling to make ends meet. And meanwhile, this government, this supposedly responsible government, is giving away a military base and paying £18 billion for the privilege. And what does Starmer do? Dodge the question. Offer no explanation. No accountability. Just a smug remark about voting Labour as if that magically solves anything. Starmer's grand solution? Vote Labour because we are stabilising the economy and increasing GDP. What economy? The one that has seen record debt levels under his leadership? The one where working people are taxed into oblivion while public services continue to rot? The one where small businesses are suffocated by excessive regulation and rising costs while corporate giants are given loopholes and handouts? And GDP? What increase? The only thing increasing under Starmer's Labour is the cost of living crisis, the tax burden on the working class, and the number of people forced to wait in agony for medical treatment. The public is sick of hearing meaningless economic jargon when their reality is soaring bills, unaffordable rent, and a health system in ruins. This is Starmer's trick: distract, deflect, and demonize anyone who dares question him. But let's get to the real issue at hand, his actual plan for the NHS. Because make no mistake, Keir Starmer is not the defender of the NHS he pretends to be. He accuses reform of wanting to privatise healthcare. But what exactly has he done? Under Starmer, the NHS is collapsing. Record waiting lists. Chronic staff shortages. Overcrowded hospitals. Bureaucratic waste on an unprecedented scale. His solution? Throw more taxpayer money at it without fixing the inefficiencies that are bleeding the system dry. He demonizes any discussion about reform while failing to offer any viable alternative. But let's not forget his history. When he was part of the Corbyn-led Labour Party, did he fight to improve the NHS? Did he push for reforms? Did he propose any meaningful policies? Of course not. He sat idly by while the system deteriorated, and now he wants us to believe that he has all the answers. But here's where it gets even worse. Is Starmer secretly laying the groundwork for backdoor privatisation? He accuses others of wanting to introduce private elements into healthcare, yet his own party has quietly expanded private contracts within the NHS. While publicly claiming to be the champion of public healthcare, Labour has been funneling billions into private providers, ensuring that their allies and donors benefit from the system's collapse. And while the NHS crumbles, the private sector grows. More people than ever are forced to go private because they simply cannot afford to wait. More private contracts are being signed in secrecy, without public scrutiny. More Labour-linked interests are profiting from the crisis they refuse to fix. Starmer is not saving the NHS, he is slowly selling it off while pretending to protect it. Why doesn't he address these contracts? Why doesn't he explain why the NHS has become more dependent on private services under Labour's watch? Why does he attack anyone who proposes solutions while allowing the very system he criticises to flourish in the shadows? Because Starmer has no plan. He has no backbone, no vision, and no answers. His entire political strategy is to paint the opposition as dangerous while offering nothing of substance himself. And when you strip away the PR spin, what is left? A man who folds under pressure, evades tough questions, and relies on fear-mongering instead of facts. If the NHS mattered to him, he would be transparent about his strategy. He would be open to discussion about improving the system. He would offer clear, actionable policies instead of rehearsed soundbites and empty platitudes. But he doesn't, because he is part of the problem. This is the real Keir Starmer, a coward in the face of real debate, a hypocrite when it comes to NHS reform, and a politician more focused on optics than on solutions. And that is something every voter should keep in mind. Keir Starmer presents himself as the great defender of the NHS, the man who will save it from years of mismanagement and underfunding. But when we scratch beneath the surface, his record tells a very different story. He talks about stabilising the economy, but what he really means is higher taxes, more bureaucracy, and a continued cycle of failure. While ordinary Britons watch the NHS crumble, Starmer and his allies are making sure they come out on top. Let's be clear, Starmer's real plan is not to fix the NHS, it's to let it collapse just enough to justify more private intervention. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Waiting times are at record highs, hospitals are struggling, staff are leaving in droves, and the service is failing millions. The result? More and more people are forced into private healthcare because they simply cannot afford to wait. And yet, Starmer dares to attack those who question the system. He smears reform and anyone else who suggests a different approach, painting them as extremists who want to dismantle the NHS. But what does he never mention? That under his watch, The NHS is already being handed over to private interests behind the scenes. The contracts keep flowing. The waiting lists keep growing. The funding is there, but it's being siphoned off into unaccountable, privately managed contracts that benefit a select few. The public health service is being deliberately weakened so that the alternative, going private, becomes inevitable for those who can afford it. And let's talk about the hypocrisy. Starmer rants about how reform's policies would destroy the NHS. Yet he stands by while Labour itself facilitates a system where fewer and fewer people can access free healthcare in a reasonable timeframe. The strategy is simple: create a crisis, refuse to fix it, and then claim that the only solution is more of the same failing policies. Does anyone really believe that Starmer is oblivious to all of this? Of course not. He knows exactly what's happening. He just doesn't want to talk about it. Instead, he hides behind meaningless rhetoric, insisting that Labour is protecting the NHS. But what exactly are they protecting? Because it's certainly not patient care. It's not efficiency. It's not accessibility. They are protecting the illusion of the NHS, keeping up the pretense that it's working while they quietly funnel more contracts into private hands. This is why Starmer will never allow a real debate on NHS reform. He cannot defend his record. He cannot explain why billions are disappearing into shadowy deals while patients wait months for treatment. He cannot answer why his party is actively supporting the exact system they claim to oppose. So, what does he do? He deflects. He distracts. He lies. And here's the ultimate question: if Starmer is so confident in his vision for the NHS, why does he fear scrutiny so much? If Labour truly had the answers, wouldn't they welcome discussion? Wouldn't they take the opportunity to prove their plan is better? But they don't, because they know they are failing. They know the NHS is deteriorating under their leadership, and they know that public trust is eroding. Their only option is to silence the debate and demonize their critics. The truth is, Starmer's NHS is a failing NHS. It's a system choking on bureaucracy, bleeding money, and offering worse service every year. And all the while, those at the top make sure they are never the ones waiting in line for treatment. So the next time Starmer stands up and talks about protecting the NHS, ask yourself, who is he really protecting? Because it certainly isn't you. Make no mistake, if we don't challenge this now, if we don't demand transparency, accountability, and genuine reform, then the NHS we claim to cherish will cease to exist as we know it. It's time to wake up. Time to hold these politicians accountable. And most of all, time to stop falling for the lies. If you agree, make sure to share this video, because the establishment doesn't want people to hear the truth. Let's make sure they do.